From the Land-Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 5th day of July, 2024. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Mike Zuzolo. He's at globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. And we'll hear from Eric Snodgrass at Nutrien Ag Solutions and Agrable about the weather forecast on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world. Online on demand to listen to whenever you'd like. Just click and play from the website, and there you'll find daily information posted from the agricultural economist, the crop scientist, and the animal scientist here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the U of I.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
September corn for the day settled at $4.10.5, a nickel higher. December, the new crop, up 4.5 at $4.24, and March futures in 2025 at $4.38, up 4.5 cents for the corn. August soybeans 8.5 higher at $11.66 and a quarter. September $11.26, up 8.5, and November soybeans $11.29 and 3/4, 8 1/4 higher. The bean meal up $7.10, settled at $357.20. The bean oil at $49.55, 91 cents higher. Wheat futures soft red in the September at $5.90.5, up 16.5, and the September hard red at $5.99, up 15.5. The December contract there at $6.16, up 15 cents. Oh, the December in the soft red up 15.5 at $6.13.5. Live cattle futures for the day finished the nearby at $186, 42.5, up 50 cents. That's the August feeder cattle. August down $1.90 for the day, and lean hogs at $89.17.5 were 65 cents lower. Crude oil at $83.20 a barrel, 68 cents lower for the day. The diesel fuel heating oil down 3 cents at $2.60 and 0.4 cents, and gasoline at $2.56 and 0.1 cent per gallon, 3 9/10 cents lower for the day. Mike Zuzolo at globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas now joins us. Hi, Mike. Thanks for being with us. A little ground to cover today because wheat futures managed to, well, take off. They took flight. The fireworks began, and not even with the overnight trade because there wasn't any. What happened here?
No, it was a nice way to come back and break up the holiday. If we would have been down 13 or 18, we would have said, why did they even open the trade up on Friday? But it was a nice way to change the dynamic of this trade. And I do think you had a few things come together, Todd. I think the biggest thing that came together was the weekly export sales. We have always been talking about the demand for the wheat and why the U.S. is not getting that demand. And we actually came in with an over 800,000 ton weekly export sales above the highest trade guess. Very welcome news. And at the same time that came out, we had the new unemployment data come out, and that was actually worse than expected. And that sent the dollar to new monthly lows. Emerging market currencies looked risk on after that, and copper was able to rally to its best level since mid-May. So the wheat, I think, had a couple things working in its favor, and I would say you probably have a little bit of weather as well working in favor of the wheat, in that you're going to probably see wet areas get too wet as we finish up the wheat harvest in the northern hemisphere, and you still got some issues out there in some dry belts as well. But I think those first two things were really the catalysts and, let's say, the fuse to light the M80.
All right. Did we take most of the hedge pressure out of the marketplace at this point too?
Yeah, the mindset that I heard late in the day, especially in the copper market, and I suspect the soft red wheat, because the soft red wheat made a new 2-week high. Hard red wheat was not able to make a new weekly high from what I could see before the settlements, and that's kind of a footprint of the funds. And I think that's where it comes back to the hedge pressure, commercial short covering, fund short covering, that I think started on Friday, but I really want to see it follow through on Monday and then get some crop conditions that would also suggest we aren't adding to the supplies, and then also look at hurricane barrels track, because that could be a big player in an already saturated middle part of the corn and bean belt.
Did I see that China was a player in the soybean market again with purchases in a big way, although I think they may have come in part from Brazil and old crop and maybe new crop both?
Yes, and I think this was a mixed bag week for the beans. However, we were able to see, I think, a new 3-week high in lead month. If the July settles those July contracts are just bid offers until late in the session. So I'm kind of tenderfooting it around the nearby and the lead month on the weekly continuation. But those exports were showing China as the number one buyer. We were, though, below the 4-week average, 32%. That was kind of countered, though, with the meal showing a really nice showing on the weekly export sales and putting in a very nice technical performance. So welcome product support from the meal market. Nice to see.
What do conditions on the ground look like for your crop there, the corn and the soybeans, the wheat too, as you go further to the west? I know you talked about barrel and maybe some potential issues.
It's been a very strange year. I would say overall, and I've been driving around for the last week, I'd say overall we are well above average. I don't think anybody would statewide put this at a record crop, though, because we've either been too wet or too dry in too many pockets. But Kansas City area, the last 5 days, down in that area and into central Missouri, I want to say they were recording 11, 12 inches of rain. And one of my wheat clients told me out in western Kansas that he had gotten about 21 inches of rain, give or take, since the first week of April. So it has been a very strange northern hemisphere weather pattern. And I think that Black Sea is a big deal. I think China is still a big deal as well.
Your producers across western Illinois into Indiana and maybe back into that home state of Ohio feeling better about the crop that they have now?
I would say generally speaking, yes, Todd, but I'd also say there's some areas in the northern part of Indiana and Ohio and also the southern part of Indiana that have missed a lot of the rain. So they'll show up on the drought map, I think, next week.
What have you been watching in the livestock sectors?
Well, not a great day on the finish side of the cattle market. Had a very strong showing to begin the day with. The end of the week, though, profit taking. We've got to watch that post July 4th holiday because we are starting to see some weakness in the consumption. And if we're going to talk about 2 Fed rate cuts this year, like they are now talking about in the financial markets, that would lead you towards the idea of a recession. So I think you got to be real careful not to get some good pricing done here this month on both fats and feeders.
Then looking back at the hogs and pigs report, made note that they kept farrowing down, but they're still expecting the number of pigs per litter to manage to offset that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think we probably bottomed. But I don't know if we have a real push to the upside. I will say, though, we had 59,000 metric tons of export sales, 98% above the 4-week average and a marketing year high. Mexico number 1, China number 2. I'd like to see that transmit into the price action next week.
Thank you much. We'll talk with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Todd. See you.
Indeed, we'll see you too. That's Mike Zuzolo. He's at globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. Joined us on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report. It comes to you from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world. You can find us online, listen to us on demand anytime you'd like. You can do that at willag.org, willag.org. There you'll find our daily ag programming to listen to anytime you'd like. Just click and play right from the website or search out the Closing Market Report in your favorite podcast applications. The theme music for the Closing Market Report is written, performed, produced, and courtesy of Logan County, Illinois farmer Tim Gleason. In today's agricultural news, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley says the next version of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Tax Credit needs common sense, lacking in this year's credit that's due to run out in December, according to him. Grassley says the 45Z credit due by the first of next year must avoid the pitfalls of the expiring 45B credit for biofuel-based sustainable aviation fuel, which is a potentially huge market for the industry.
This silly thing that we're going to subsidize imports of palm oil to a greater extent than we help encourage soybeans to be used in sustainable aviation fuel is nonsense.
Grassley's been outspoken, speaking against using cooking oil imports from China to qualify for the SAF tax credit.
We need fairness between imports and soybeans.
The Iowa senator does credit USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack for his interagency efforts to get fairness despite the limited success.
I think he made a good faith effort to get some of these 3 other government agencies that were involved in the 40B requirements. And in the end, I don't think he was successful. I applaud him for continuing to bring some common sense to it.
He can do that by calling for stakeholder input on feedstock climate requirements for next year's credit. Grassley hopes Congress puts an end to any SAF tax credit favoring imported feedstocks over domestic ones, an imbalance he argues will be a disaster for U.S. grain production. And one other item to report, this one too, from Iowa, where Smithfield Foods will close its Altoona ham boning facility and consolidate the production volume at other locations to improve the efficiency, it says, of its manufacturing platform. Smithfield says it will provide transition assistance to the 314 employees at the facility who will be affected by the closure. The company will meet with employees individually to provide additional details about the transition plans, including severance and potential employment opportunities with Smithfield. Production from Smithfield's Altoona facility will be consolidated into existing company facilities in Monmouth, Illinois, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and one in Nebraska. And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Let's check the global growing regions and see what crop conditions and weather have been like in those and how that might change in the next week or so and further down the line as well. We're now joined by Eric Snodgrass. He's at Nutrineg Solutions and Agrable. Hi, Eric. Thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Let's begin with the rainfall in the Midwest. On relatively cool conditions, will that change in this next week?
Well, we're finally seeing something we've not seen at all this summer, which is a big western U.S. ridge. And even though overall the bigger picture things haven't changed, we're just in a time period where the western U.S. is going to take on all the heat, and it's going to take it on for a while, at least 10 days. And that's why we've got cooler air in place. The front swept through, saw a lot of natural fireworks across the Corn Belt yesterday in addition to real ones. And what ended up happening is we've kind of broken away from the risk of a lot of heat for a while. And at the same time, while that's all going on, while all this, I mean, it's like 120 degrees plus in the Central Valley of California. That's how hot it is out west. But while all that's happening, we had a hurricane that moved across the Caribbean, hit Jamaica really hard, hit the Yucatan Peninsula south of Cancun, yesterday, and now it's heading its way toward Texas. And the good news is it's going to weaken, but the moisture is going to keep streaming farther to the north. And I was actually calling several guys this morning down in the Mid-South who are beyond happy that the moisture from a hurricane is going to get into their region, because while the Northwest Corn Belt's been so wet, other parts of the Corn Belt have been relatively dry. So here's the thing, Todd. I mean, if we're going into this mid-July time period, avoiding major heat stress, and a lot of places have received some good moisture as of late, this is about what would be ideal. I think the problem is just how much water came in the previous 8 weeks. And so I think that's our setup here in the near term.
So corn pollination underway in the month of July. I take it you think that's going to go pretty well in most places. The weather we have had has followed the pattern that you and many others were discussing in the wintertime, kind of warmer overall. I don't know. You'll have to tell me whether that's really the case, but wet. And then you were concerned about drier conditions coming in later in the season. Can you put both of those in context?
Yeah, so here we are. We're a little bit in some places late, right? So you think about much of Minnesota and Iowa as being late due to excessive rain. I mean, even in the month of June, those counties that line western Iowa, northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, parts of South Dakota, it was one of the wettest Junes they've ever had. And there's still more rain coming in the near term before they get a little bit of a slowdown next week. But the reality is that that's going to push this crop needing more time later in the season to finish. And so I've always been worried every time we have a wet spring and there's delays about an early frost. Well, La Nina is waiting in the wings. It's not there yet, but it's trying to get going. We're INSO neutral now. And I just looked up earlier this week and found that most years when we have a developing La Nina, we actually tend to push a bit of a warmer and drier fall. And that'd be good. I don't want a cold snap early, and I certainly don't want it to be soaking wet. And so the bigger picture is you get up there to August, September, October, and I feel as though we've got a better look as we try to finish this particular season. But you're right. In the meantime, we have pollination, and for the beginning of it, we're certainly going to be missing some of the heat around here.
Turn your attention to other places we've been watching. Dry conditions, I think, are still an issue in parts of the Black Sea area.
Yeah, I was just looking this morning at some NDVI data there. And once again, you choose kind of the eastern half of Ukraine and then that what they call the southern Russian wheat belt. In other words, that's about 60 million acres, twice the size of Iowa. And we have the lowest NDVI values in the last 20 years. And the forecast is averaging 10 to 12 degrees hotter than normal for the next 10 days and very, very dry. And so I'm waiting to hear more news out of this area. Like, we've been tracking problems in that part of Western Russia, Eastern Ukraine for a while. And, I'm just waiting for it to all of a sudden become something more than it is and not getting a whole lot of info. So I think it's going to be something that may all of a sudden show up about the time that there could be problems elsewhere around the world. And you know how it works, Todd. They all just compound, and then all of a sudden there's a story that hopefully pushes the markets in the right direction. But at this point, I just want people to know, keep an eye on Ukraine and Russia because it's not ideal there right now.
Do we have to keep an eye on China as it's related to dry conditions, or at least part of it there as well, too?
Yeah, we had drought in kind of around Beijing. So there's big growing areas that surround Beijing, both to the north and to the west. One of them is called the North China Plain. They were really dry. It was just dry south of Beijing as well. Again, a big spot where to grow corn and beans. But the forecast, plus what just recently fell, broke that drought issue. So I think that's come off the table as being a major story going forward. They got some critical rains right at the right time.
Thank you much. We'll talk with you again next week.
All right, sounds good.
Eric Snodgrass is with Nutrient Ag Solutions and Agrable. Joined us on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report. It came to you from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world, online, on demand, anytime you'd like at willag.org. That's WILLAG.org.